Welcome to the Book of Law podcast, everybody. Episode 1. Our topic today is going to be culture. What is it and why it matters? Rachel Book, how are you doing today?
I am doing well, excited for a great conversation. What about you?
Me too. I love the topic of culture. I love dialoguing about culture, how to inject it into an organization, how to keep it moving. So why don't we start with, because I consider you the resident expert on all these things, Rachel. Why don't we talk about how to define culture?
Yes, I will qualify by saying I have expertise, but I am learning more every day, so I would not consider myself an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but we will learn from each other. It's funny because I was once in a session where I was leading a session with it was a client group of a company that I was working for, and it was probably 30 or so people, and they were members of a financial advisory company, and they asked me to come talk to them about culture, and it was particularly about cultivating a culture of inclusion. And so, we started off by asking, what are you looking to gain from today's session? And everyone was, talking about culture. And finally I said, let's take a step back. I'm really curious to hear how you all define culture. And what was so interesting is everyone said something else. And so we had an opportunity to really level set on what the heck is culture exactly before we start talking about how to create it and cultivate it and change it and all that. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to define culture. One of the best definitions I've seen, and actually for a while I didn't know who this was attributed to, and I just discovered that it's from a 2015 book called School Culture Rewired by Steve Gruner and Todd Whitaker. And so Bella will put the source, she'll put the information in our show notes. But what they said is that culture is defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. Let that sink in for a sec. Culture is defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. So we're going to dig more into that after. But, when I think about culture, I actually like to define it with a feeling instead of words, right? So culture, I think, is like the temperature in the room. You walk into a room and you automatically know, you feel, am I comfortable? Am I feeling hot? Am I feeling cold? If somebody asked most of us, when you walk into a room, what is the temperature? I don't know that we would be able to say it's 69 degrees or 72 degrees, right? We'd have a general feeling like it feels warm, it feels cold, it feels comfortable, it feels not comfortable. But we may not be able to put it into words. And I think culture is very similar to that, right? You feel it instantly when you walk into a room, but you may not know how to articulate it. The other nuance, if you'll indulge me with my analogy on the temperature and that, if you change the temperature, right? If you walk into a room and it feels too cold and you go up to the thermostat or you go on your phone's app and you change the temperature, it's not going to become comfortable right away, right? How long does it take? If you come into a room and it's really cold and you move the temperature up to 70, it probably takes like an hour to come up to a reasonable temperature. And just like culture, if your culture isn't great and you want to change it, it's going to take some time. The other nuance is everyone feels it differently, right? Three of us can walk into the same room. I might be cold, you might be warm, and somebody else might be fine. And culture is the same way. People experience it differently. Some people might say, our culture is awesome. Others might say, no, there's actually, work we can do, or it's problematic. And then the last piece, if I haven't gone over my quota yet here, is culture is impacted by the people around you, right? So just like if you stuff 27 people into a tiny conference room, it's going to get really warm really fast, right? And so culture is contagious, right? The culture that you have anywhere definitely gets spread by the people in it. So I know that was a very long answer to a short question, but I'm curious to hear what you think of that, Patrick, and also how you define culture.
Rachel, that was awesome. That was a great overview. And no, you didn't take too much of your allotted time. People should hear more from you about this stuff. My commentary about hallmarks of bad culture or hallmarks of good culture kind of go way back. I mentioned in our episode 0, when we introduced each other, kind of where I became aware of culture was in 2005, 2006, after US Bank Corp acquired the business I was with, a company called GenPass Technologies. My 7 or 8 years before US Bank acquired GenPass were in really unique environments. that were high tempo, high speed, really focused on growth, not how the growth was happening, just growth, brute force, execution of product builds, product delivery into markets, onboarding, selling. I didn't really ever hear about the associate experience until I got to US Bancorp. It's not that those other places were bad. They were venture capital backed groups, private equity. One of the businesses went public while I was there, which is a large human talent drain. I don't mean that in a negative way. That's a lot of energy to take a company public. So I grew up in corporate America not thinking that the associate was center. Good, bad, or ugly. That's just my experience of that. I don't even know if I could have talked to someone like you, Rachel, about culture in 2005. I don't even know if I could have defined it. And I'll swing back to my time in the military and my time flying too in culture. But in the corporate America version, I didn't know what it was until US Bank. And they really did a really good job there, a really, really good job there of making sure that everyone understood that if the associate was in a good place and enjoyed the room temperature they had, then the clients felt that there was an extension of a person's behaviors internally that manifested itself externally. And clients wanted to be around organizations or prospects or vendor partners where the people were content in their environment. Because I don't think you could make anything a perfect culture for everybody, because everyone has a different lens. Everyone has a different temperature they like. Think about bedding now. They're selling beds where one side of the bed can be hot, the other side of the bed can be cold. And that's a couple. Like they're sharing their life together. And now you can have different temperatures in a bed. Well, everyone has a different temperature setting they like. So I believe that the hardest leadership component that exists is navigating, driving, installing culture. Not just eliminating bad culture, but starting the process of culture, because it's a muscle memory. Like remembering the people you're dealing with, whether it's a peer or a subordinate or a superior or whatever words you want to use to describe bosses and employees and coworkers. If everyone doesn't understand what their behaviors do to the temperature in the room, if there's not a version of self-awareness in all the individuals and there's not an attempt to help people get self-aware, which is going to be another episode, everybody, self-awareness, it's coming up, then it's even harder to interject a good culture or eliminate a bad one. So an example for me would be like, you can almost overpraise people. And then is there a version of culture where everything is, oh, you're doing great, and you lose the ability to have a hard conversation with someone? And then people get confused. Well, I don't want to upset someone. Like I don't want to upset someone. That's a hard thing to do, right? Is to have a hard conversation with somebody. And is it going to ruin the culture? No. Like part of a good culture is where you can have open and honest dialogue and a feedback loop with each other, where you can help the individuals grow. You're adding to their personal toolkit of their professional behaviors with clients, with each other, keeping your word. I always found it fascinating, the phrase undercommit and overproduce. There was a customer in New Mexico that I experienced way back. It was called See You Anytime. It was an ATM network, and they had great relationships with credit unions in that area that we were servicing. And the guy that ran the place would tell me all the time, Patrick, just keep your word. Your culture should be that your company keeps your word. If you're going to tell me you're going to execute this thing by this date, do it. And if you can't, tell me early. Fail fast. Inspect what you expect. Undercommit and overproduce. There's a version of culture in those kinds of words and those kind of professional behaviors within organizations, with each other, and externally. And I think people take that for granted a lot while they're in the middle of trying to figure out whatever culture they're in. Just start with the basics, like keeping your word. And in a place that makes it hard to keep your word. Corporate America is hard to keep your word because there's so many parts and there's so many pieces and there's so many different teams navigating the environment together. It's hard to keep your word. Think about a sales organization out in the market representing to existing clients or prospects something that we want to do with them. It only takes one moment to ruin months or years of work of building rapport if you don't keep your word and you don't execute and you don't keep your promises. So that's a version of culture, like keeping your word. My family motto is talk is cheap. It takes money to buy whiskey. Like people have heard me say that for a long time. Don't be an organization that just talks. You have to execute. That's the pouring of the whiskey. That's a version of culture. So anyway, I probably ran over my time too, Rachel, but that's my commentary on it at the high level.
Such great commentary. There's so many nuggets of wisdom that you just said. What I heard from you is that culture is not a one size fits all, right? That's clear. Also, even if you think you don't have a culture, just because nobody talks about it, there still is one. Because the default is something, right? It may not be awesome, but it is something. And then the commitment to execution. So what you said, that really, really resonated with me, because just like that quote that I used in my opening remarks, right? Your culture is defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate. The hallmark of your culture is about clarity of consequences. And so if people are getting away with bad behavior, or people are saying, or people think that it's okay to commit to doing something and then not follow through, that becomes your culture, right? Then you don't have a culture of excellence. And I think that works well in families also, right? So how many parents do you know that, you tell your kid like, hey, if you do really well on your test, I'm going to, buy you a car or take you to Disneyland. And then, you kind of forget. Or on the flip side, if you, show up late after your curfew, or if you forget to take out the trash, then I'm going to, reduce your screen time, or I don't know, something like that. And then you don't follow through. Well, how do the kids relate to that? They're sort of like, oh, I can get away with it. Yeah, right. My parents promised me this. So actually, I don't know if I told you this, Patrick, but did I ever tell you about when I canceled my son's birthday party?
No.
His face, he's like,
how do you cancel a birthday?
Yeah, so my son was like 5 years old. I think he was around 5. And I don't remember the exact circumstance, but I remember that there was something that he was doing. And I said, if you do that again, there's going to be consequences, right? And obviously it was something age appropriate. And then finally I said, if you do this again, or like if you, hit your brother, or I don't know, something like that. I said, I'm going to cancel your birthday party. And he did it again. And I canceled his birthday party. So I obviously didn't tell everyone the reason. I think I sent out some generic email that said, oh, we need to reschedule. But he was shocked. And it really stuck with him. And he knows now, he's 16 now, he knows that I'm serious. Like if I say I'm going to, reduce your screen time, or, he's a great kid. So we really don't have to have any of these.
Look, accountability is a large culture component.
Yes.
I've said for years that, sorry to interrupt you real quick, but I've said for years to people that I've worked with that don't leave bad actors around. And there is a school of thought that it's not very appropriate. And this is the beauty of Rachel and I, right? Like we're a bit of an odd couple in that regard. I'm a little more rough around the edges than she is, so everybody bear with me. But don't leave bad actors around. It's better to remove them from an environment and go down a head count, which may delay some things or some work won't get done. But the benefit of removing toxic behavior, bad behavior, underperforming behavior, the benefit of that actually gives a boost of the people who are working hard. There's a culture component to that. If associates, coworkers believe that it's okay to mail it in every day while everyone else is working hard and that person gets to stay around and maybe on occasion gets celebrated for certain things that they probably shouldn't be celebrated for, while all these other people are putting in all these hours and all this effort to do the right thing, and meanwhile their coworker is a bad actor, that sends a bad message through an organization that creates a culture of tolerating bad. And the definition of bad could be its own podcast, but like don't leave people around that aren't executing. Show the organization there is accountability. Cancel some birthday parties.
Yeah, and it's because culture is contagious, right? So I think there's actually two nuances to that point, Patrick. One is when people are just not doing their job well, right? They're slacking off, they're lazy. So as you know, I'm a student of psychology, and I learned that there's actually an official term for this. It's called social loafing. Social
Social
loafing
loafing.
is
Okay.
is a term to describe a person who comes into work, they do their job, they're fully intending to be focused and productive and effective, and then they look around them and they're like, hey, that person's slacking off. That person took a 3-hour lunch. This person's not signing in when they're supposed to. Hey, I can get away with that too. Right? So that's where that behavior is contagious. I think the other aspect, which is a little bit more toxic, is when you have someone who is awesome at their job. They may have very critical knowledge. They may be really bright. They may be accomplishing tremendous things, but maybe they're really mean to other people, or they're really disrespectful, or their behavior is inappropriate in whatever way. And I think that behavior, when it's tolerated, that has a tremendous impact on culture, because it lets everyone know that those behaviors are acceptable and there are no consequences. I once saw a comic, and Bill, I don't know if we can share this in our show notes, but the comic is Attila the manager. And it shows Attila, right, sitting in a corner office, behind a desk, and then it shows, a chair, darts in the back of a chair, and people like feeling all scared. And then someone says, yes, but he gets results. So I think companies who are true to their culture, and if their culture has values like respect for each other, or whatever, right? Even if someone is your best employee and has all kinds of knowledge and everything, that should not continue to be acceptable.
We'll touch on this in the self-awareness episode in the next couple of weeks. But earlier in my career, it was pointed out to me by a really unique organization through a series of interviews they did with staff that I had or coworkers I had, which is hard to hear your coworkers and staff talk about you. And it was recorded and played back to me. And it was, he's not very nice, but he gets a lot done. Like I've heard that in my career. That was the late 90s. In my first 4 years of leadership, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. I already told you I worked in places where culture and associate experience wasn't important. Only results mattered, which we are a results-oriented society. Corporate America needs results, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do it and be nice. And I think you and I were talking about that yesterday, weren't like, it shouldn't be okay that you're not nice. And look, I still have my moments, but I've shaved off a lot of my rough edges over the years, or tried to. And one of the examples was when I was walking down the hallway, I'd look at my shoes. Like I wouldn't have my head up saying good morning or hello. And that's a version of culture, isn't it? Like instead of just solely being focused on the next hill I'm going to climb, you can stop and say, hey, how's your day going? That's a version of culture. Again, in that part of my career, I didn't know it. There was no one there to talk about stuff like this or educate me or guide me. That didn't happen until the US Bank days, as I referenced. So it's interesting that you called that out. I've actually heard that about me. Man, he gets a lot done, but be nice if you remember what my kid's name was. Like that's a version of culture.
Yeah, we'll have another conversation. I think it's on our topics list about how to have tough discussions with people, right? Because sometimes as managers and leaders, we need to give people tough news, and we need to tell someone that they're not doing well, or that they've lost their job, or something else. But we can do it in a way that still shows respect and sensitivity, right? Yeah. And I think one way to always do that is focus on the performance, not the personality, right? I think sometimes, it's even about culture. We focus so much on personality. How often have you heard someone say, oh, we can't hire Joe Schmo, they're not a culture fit, or they wouldn't fit into our culture? Have you heard that? So I always see that as code for bias. Right? And what I usually hear is sometimes it's actually extreme discrimination. Usually not, but sometimes. More often it's they wouldn't be fun to have a drink with after work. Right? And
I've heard that one.
Yeah, some people call it the beer test, right? They're not a culture fit, right? We should be thinking about culture ads, not culture fits. But, when you talk to someone, again, the hard part of the conversation, that's focused on what the business needs, you can still introduce your own personality and your own kindness.
One of the best things I did over my career, or started to do years ago, it was also at US Bank, was I started having one-on-ones with everyone on the staff.
Oh.
Everyone. Didn't matter what level they were, what their job was, how many years in the seat they had, how many years in the company they had. I wanted to meet with everyone. And I stumbled upon it. It sounds so basic when I say it out loud. Yeah, you should meet with everyone. Well, at the time, the team was 450 people, and doing one-on-ones with 450 people is hard. But I had them on like a 14-month cycle to get through them all. And I was there long enough where I did it 3 or 4 times because it was a multi-year job. Sitting down and listening to what someone's day is like, not just from how the tools work or the customer interactions, but what their experience was with the room temperature is what I was really after. There was a time in my career I didn't know how to do that. But when I started doing those one-on-ones, I learned so much about what their lens is. I learned from a leadership perspective that my direct reports at the time, who were magnificent, I still talk to several of them, because I hold on to people I work with that I like. I want to be part of their life for longer than just our time together at work. But they would give me information that was sometimes filtered. Like, oh, he doesn't need to know that, or he doesn't need to know this, or he's too busy to worry about that, which maybe is true. But I wanted to understand better what it was like to do some of these jobs. And it turned into something of they would teach me how to do their job. Like these were jobs I did years ago, and now I'm the boss of those jobs. And there's a great story out of our Minneapolis office where the cash team was there that would order cash for ATMs. And I said, teach me how to do that. I did it years ago, and it used to be in a spreadsheet. Now we have all these fancy tools and algorithms that we follow, and we're predicting the future of cash usage. But show me. And they taught me how to order cash, and because we held them accountable to like residuals, how much money comes out of the next load of Brinks showing up and putting the money in and coming out, and a 20-25% residual was the aspirational target. And so they gave me 10 ATMs and taught me how to do it, and I was horrible. I was last on the team, and they loved the fact that I sat down and wanted to learn how they do what they do, not because I knew better than them. I just wanted, they were the experts at that point. Show me what you do. And it sent a message through the organization that the guy that holds the SVP title or whatever I was at the time isn't an expert in everything. And that's okay not to be an expert of everything. We should be continual learners. That's a version of injecting a culture of it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to make a mistake. And I made a couple, because back then you would call a phone number to order money. And instead of ordering $1 million, I ordered 10. Which set off all kinds of alarms, and everyone thought it was hilarious. They were able to save me from myself. But, the boss made this giant mistake. Like showing a vulnerability as a leader that you're not perfect and not everything is completely buttoned up is a version of injecting culture of acceptance, I think. And work isn't all soft all the time. It isn't always about the kindness and all of that. It has to be part of it. But there's another side of representing that we're human. And I think a culture of where it's okay to be human, that it's okay to make mistakes, actually drives a performance. And I saw it in real time, which is why I kept those meetings going year after year after year. I took phone calls in a call center. I was talking to clients, like not a lot of people of rank, if you want to call it that, make the time to do stuff like that. And it sends such a nice message into the people that you care about what they do and that every tooth of the gear that's turning is important, that the machine works well. And again, whether you're a 3-month person or a 3-year person or a 30-year person, you want to be seen. I consider that a culture of inclusion. Like there's a tidbit for anyone listening, like whether you have a team of 10 or 10,000 or 100 or 1, get to know the people that work for you, even if it takes a lot of time, so they know you as a person. You're not just this name out of nowhere making decisions that impact their day to day. Like that's a version of injection of culture, of openness and transparency that I think a lot of orgs lack. And I try to do that. I did that when I came here, Rachel, if you know, like I tried to meet with as many people as I could. I still haven't gotten to everybody, but I want to hear what their day is like. And I think you can build culture from the ground up. I don't think culture is top down.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what you described as feeling comfortable and safe, letting everyone know that you're not awesome at everything, because nobody really is, creates a culture of psychological safety. If you haven't followed Amy Edmondson's work, you should. She wrote a book called The Fearless Organization, and she studies psychological safety. And in the introduction to her book, she talks about how hospitals have better patient outcome rates when it's proven that staff members, and they may be, surgical techs or nurses, feel comfortable calling out when they see an error. Right. So imagine that you're a nurse in a hospital and you're following notes and you see something in the patient notes about a dosage of a medication that looks really off. In a psychologically safe organization, you'll feel comfortable challenging your supervisor or the doctor saying, hey, was there a typo here? Did somebody scribble the wrong number? If you're worried that, if I say something, I might get fired or people might, discipline me for challenging authority, then you're going to go ahead and give that patient that potentially wrong dosage of medication. So, I consider ourselves very lucky that in most corporate environments, especially ours, like if somebody makes a mistake, nobody dies. Yeah. But imagine, and we'll hear stories from your military service, in medical situations and aviation, right? The stakes are much, much higher. So
much higher.
A culture of psychological safety is really, really critical.
Yeah. Learning how to throttle what's important and what's not is huge, because that could drive an issue, right? Like tempering. You're right. A lot of this stuff isn't life and death, and should be throttled accordingly. I want to say one more thing, and then we should probably wrap up and give the good people their time back, right, Rachel? But I want to talk about culture inside a culture. Some of the organizations I've been in over time, maybe the culture wasn't so great up here or over here. Because larger orgs, I've been in a 40,000 person company, a 70,000 person company, a 400 person company, and you've been in several different size companies too. Cultures like geography, right? Like if you think about Texas, where I'm at, and for everyone, Rachel's in New Jersey today, I'm in Texas today. Texas is such a big place. The weather in West Texas and the weather in Southeast Texas could be off 20, 30 degrees, but it's the same state, big place. Companies are the same way. You could have, that team's got great culture, or this team doesn't have that great a culture, or this boss is this, or that boss is that. I've tried to tell everybody, and I've tried to navigate this myself with, you can create a culture inside a culture. Don't sit back and let whatever you're describing as, the bosses, they act like this. Well, don't act like that. People have more power or control than they think. Sometimes culture injection or culture management or culture experiences, the difference can be the courage of the person that's responsible in their space. And you don't have to be the boss to create culture. I see everyone as a self-contained unit that is interacting with different self-contained units. And each of those people can make decisions on their behaviors, on their performance, on how they deliver and execute that drives culture. Do not sit back and say, it's just the way it is. Take control of the environment. It doesn't mean you can make all the decisions, and it doesn't mean you can change what's happening above you or next to you. But for you and the team you're responsible for, or the client you're responsible for, you can inject culture, positive culture, based on your own behavior. And then other people will start to notice that and probably end up following you. Where there's voids of leadership and voids of good culture, I think it's up to all of us to fill that void with something better than what's occurring. Don't water cool complain about the culture, change the culture. Even people with 3 months in a job have a lot more ability to make change than they probably realize. I can't do that. I've only been here 3 months, or I don't have a boss's title. Titles shouldn't matter. Everyone's a leader. Everyone is a leader. It doesn't mean you're bossing people around. It doesn't mean you get to make all the decisions, but you can lead the environment that you're in based on how you're performing and how you show up in a room or how you show up to a call. Just don't let things happen. Try to help navigate those things. It's easier said than done, but if you don't try, you won't find out. I wanted to say that too, Rachel. People at all levels of whatever type of organization they're in, nurses, doctors, corporate America, aviation, the military, whoever's listening to this, you have more control than you might think in terms of how culture's seen or felt. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we wrap.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that people who are new to an organization actually probably have the best perspective because it's fresh, right? When you're in an environment for a long time, you're kind of in a routine, things are habitual. You don't notice things, but somebody who shows up, right? So you're all in an office and it's really warm and somebody comes in from the freezing cool outdoors, right? They're like, ooh, it's really warm in here, right? Same thing with new people who come to a company. And so whenever we have a new team member join us, I make it a point to reach out and say, hey, during your first few weeks, you might be sitting in meetings or having conversations and feel, oh, I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to ask the question. I'm just the newbie here. I said, actually take advantage of that. We want to hear from you. You have fresh perspective. You might notice things that many of us won't. So you can decide whether it's appropriate to speak up in a meeting or, just keep your notes, on a list and then follow up with someone afterwards. But please tell us all the things that you notice and that you recognize. I think that's really critical. And then finally, before we wrap, so, if you've been inspired by this conversation and you're thinking, okay, so what do I do next, right? If you're a leader who might be in a position to actually craft a culture for your company and then disseminate it, or if you already have one and you're trying to figure out how to evolve it, I would say first take a step back and consider what the elements of your culture really are. You might have a list of values, or every company calls them something else. Ask around, ask people what they think, the values of the company are. And then what you do next is once you decide if those are good or if you need to tweak them or evolve them, then weave them into everything you do. Like literally everything you do at your company should be aligned with those cultural values. And what that means is when you hire people, your interview questions should be aligned across those themes. When you do performance reviews, you should be rating people and rewarding people or dealing with performance issues based on those themes. When you do engagement surveys, you should be using that also. It needs to be embedded everywhere, and that's how you can measure and monitor and decide when you need some interventions or adjustments. So this was such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll put some of the books and authors and sources in the show notes. And next time, Patrick, do you want to tell everyone what we're talking about next?
Episode 2 will be self-awareness. We're going to talk about who we are as people, how we as people show up at work, how what we bring with us impacts others, influences others, and how self-aware leaders, my humble opinion, are the best leaders. Because if you really know who you are, if you don't know who you are, how can you lead other people? Like you have to understand yourself in order to get the most out of the groups that you're leading or working with. So Rachel and I are gonna go through a self-awareness journey. Mine was an interesting one. Rachel's had an interesting journey on that front from a leadership perspective. So I think that's gonna be a fun episode. That's what's coming next, guys.